in the beginning of the pandemic was the first time ever I opened my mouth on social media. And I remember it was when we started to reopen and we realized, okay, we can start to serve through third-party delivery, and we became a pillar in the community and our sales started to pick up about 3 weeks after the initial lockdown. So we reached out to a significant amount of the people who we had originally laid off. Now remember, I mentioned those were people who were living at home, college students, working with mom, kind of living with mom and dad. And all of them, I'm not even being sarcastic when I tell you this, rejected the offer to come back because they said, I'm making $1,200 or $1,100 a week now on unemployment. Why would I come back and work?
What was going through your mind those first couple weeks? You had the first 2 weeks, it seems like a lifetime ago, but 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And if I remember correctly, everyone basically obeyed, no questions asked, like, 2 weeks, we'll do what we got to do. Did you kind of feel that as an owner of a restaurant? And then when did you realize, maybe something ain't right here?
Yeah, bingo, exactly. For the first 2 weeks, that's what everybody was thinking. And I joke about this and I say that's when the cliche really was true. We all were in it together. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of put our business capes on at that point because we had let a lot of our employees go, unfortunately, because we didn't know what was going to happen. So we were almost encouraged by the business community that, you lay everybody off, the government's going to be really easy about making sure that they get the unemployment benefits, and then you can just, or furlough them, and then you can take them back aboard. So we tried to only lay off those that were either working from college, living with mom and dad, who kind of wanted the unemployment benefits. And then we kept on a lot of our team members who were, sole providers for their family. And we pivoted immediately to be able to feed all of the first responders, right? Police, EMT, fire, and then those on in the medical field. And, what was pretty funny about that, I joke, I tell this little story. We were giving free food to anybody who was a first responder in these kind of broad categories. And, people picked up on that right away. So even within the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, we had people showing up for takeout. They would go buy scrubs for like $1 to get their free lobster roll. So the grift was in from the very beginning.
So when did you realize though that this is way beyond 2 weeks and we got a much bigger problem here?
Well, when everyone started to over-intellectualize the numbers, right? It was all about this, it kept getting higher and higher and higher in regards to altitude, right? So by altitude, I mean, we're grounded in the beginning. It's very easy to understand. 2 weeks, we flatten the curve. We give the hospitals opportunity to increase, all of the necessary PPP and the equipment they need in order to deal with this pandemic. But then it goes into the next level, right? In the stratosphere where it's okay, well, now we have these metrics about ICU capacity and then the numbers. And we started to play this overly intellectualized game of math where businesses couldn't even keep up anymore. So then it was almost as if we were confounded by the numbers and just forced back into these lockdowns over and over and over again.
Can you talk about just like the personal side of when you had to make calls or meet people or whatever it was, when you had to lay them off or furlough them? Because I've met a lot of restaurateurs over the last year, more than I've ever met in my entire life. And most of the ones, at least that I've met here in LA, they're not particularly political people. They've been mugged by politics, so now they're political. But most of them really were just upset about having to lay off people, people that had to lay off chefs that had been working with them for 30 years. I met one guy who owned something like 40 restaurants, had to lay off almost 1,000 people. And this is serious stuff.
Yeah, and we were at a trajectory, if you will, in our business. We had just kind of finished recapitalizing the company, so we actually had just brought on some new positions from a corporate perspective, and we were trying to grow the franchise angle. And then it was an immediate, we just brought you on, but we got to let you go. And we let a lot of people go. And my wife and I, it was just the two of us. We kept on a couple key players on the corporate side. I'd stopped taking a salary. It was really about survival at that point. But the hardest thing was trying to explain to people who didn't necessarily understand what was going on. A significant portion workforce, they don't speak English that well. Many of them, frankly, are, don't necessarily understand the government framework in the United States. So it was, okay, you're letting me go, but am I going to get paid? I don't want to file for unemployment because I'm kind of afraid of government systems. So a lot of hand-holding. My wife was getting phone calls almost at every hour of the day trying to explain to people, don't worry, we're going to be able to bring you back on board. We're going to loan you some money. We're going to help you out in this regard. We're here for you. And that was the hardest part.
How stressful was it for you financially? I mean, you're laying off people to save some money, but You had no idea when things were going to open. And even now, things are still weird.
Yeah, we didn't have the cash flow to be able to sit back comfortably and say, we're going to see this thing through. We didn't, we had debt being called in regards to all the different businesses. As I'd mentioned with my other concept, Butterleaf, it was immediate, right? Like I still had, what was really fascinating about this was I was still getting phone calls from sales and use tax, right? The Board of Equalization on sales tax saying, okay, the year's up, now you owe X amount of dollars, and we're not even open, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. They don't care. I'm getting letters in the mail that not only tack on the amount that we owe, and I'm talking within the first month of the pandemic, but adding interest and penalties and then more interest on the penalties. That never stopped.
Man, it's just crazy. So did you consider yourself kind of political before this? We've talked off the record once or twice. I have a sense of what your politics are. Now I can tell, obviously, on Twitter, too. But were you political before any of this stuff?
I've always been fascinated by politics. I was in Model UN Youth in Government growing up in high school. I volunteered for multiple senators. She's an urban planner, so you kind of have to be across the board. So it was always imbued in my environment, but I was never really, really vocal about it. And I always knew not to be vocal about it. What was really interesting in the restaurant space is that I joke about how really chefs are all libertarians. You have Anthony Bourdain, who frankly I believe has had some amazing, we'll call them quotes when it comes to the ways in which government affects or doesn't affect the restaurant world and everything beyond.
Yeah.
But everybody knows, especially in California, just kind of keep your mouth shut. And even in Orange County, right? But in the beginning of the pandemic was the first time ever I opened my mouth on social media. And I remember it was when we started to reopen and we realized, okay, we can start to serve through third-party delivery, and we became a pillar in the community and our sales started to pick up about 3 weeks after the initial lockdown. So we reached out to a significant amount of the people who we had originally laid off. Now remember, I mentioned those were people who were living at home, college students, working with mom, kind of living with mom and dad. And all of them, I'm not even being sarcastic when I tell you this, rejected the offer to come back because they said, I'm making $1,200 or $1,100 a week now on unemployment. Why would I come back and work? And I get it, right?
Yeah,
we said, okay, I understand. I would love to be able to make the same amount of money, read some books, take care of the kids. So I don't hold them, accountable for that decision. But I posted that anecdote just on Twitter. And man, it blew up. It went completely viral. And I started getting attacked along the lines of, oh, well, if only you paid your employees more, then they wouldn't be able to do that. If you only provided them health care, et cetera, et cetera. And it immediately became a divisive debate when all I was merely doing was just saying, hey, this is what's happening out there in the business world.
Right, because even if you paid them double that, some of them might be like, it's still not worth it because I can get half for free. And it's like, there's no economics behind it, in essence.
Exactly. Well, even a lot of the people who were having come back, because we do pay a significant amount of money for people to work in the restaurant and then add tips into that, they were making about $35 an hour front of the house. So let's say they were bringing in $1,500 a week, but now they bring in $1,000 by virtue of the unemployment. They're still netting $1,000 to not work, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but people didn't care about that. It was, here's my position and here's what's going to happen. So it just became, at that point, I realized, okay, well, you know what? I'm not going to sit back anymore. I'm going to dig in on this, and I'm not going to be a dick about it, but I'm going to use real life stories to kind of back up some of these platitudes.
Was that kind of the first moment that you decided to really get more vocal about all this?
Yep. That was exactly it. That was the moment right there. And it's funny because if you go through and you do a full, search, which I'm sure many people have done of my social, you will see that was the moment in time. Everything before that was mayonnaise and fart jokes.
That was when you put the red pill in the lobster roll, apparently. What was it like, though? So then you get confronted with that issue. Did you have trouble getting guys back then because of that? I mean, did you have to hire new people? Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We had to hire new people. We had to completely alter our operations. So for me, I'm not going to sit back and cry and complain. It's okay, well, what can I do to get ahead of this? So once I realized that one of the barriers was going to be having accessibility to a strong labor force, okay, well, then we're going to automate our systems, right? So immediately it was co-packing a lot of our sauces, which we previously made in-house, spices, et cetera. So trying to decrease the units of labor that we need in order to provide a high-quality product without, of course, compromising what our original mission was as a restaurant.
Do you sense that some restaurants, and I don't blame them actually, because it all just sucks, but do you sense that many are starting to cut corners and things? And the reason I ask that is, you know, because of my Twitter, I mean, we cook a lot around here, so I've only gone out to restaurants a couple times, but I've noticed that a bunch of the restaurants, stuff is just not as good. And I kind of don't blame them for having to cut corners, but also like the zest for life that a chef would have when they get to see customers and get feedback and get compliments, as opposed to just sort of being a robot now on these takeout orders.
Bingo. And, you know, I always joke, I say food is representative of life. And by that, I mean, if you're in a, everyone's partying and everything's great, et cetera, it's like you remember the flavors of the food you ate in the midst of that, right?
Yeah.
The spice, the pepper, the acids, the pop, this and that, the hard char, right? Just this overly amplified food. And right now, what are we living through? We're living through a time where absolutely everybody feels hopelessness, despair, anxiety, depression, et cetera. And I think food is reflecting that. So yes, I agree 100% with your point, but I'm not just seeing it in the restaurant space. I'm also seeing it in the hospitality space. I traveled a lot throughout the pandemic, and what I noticed was that people were using the pandemic as a means by which they could increase profits, cut corners, but of course blame the pandemic, right? So no housekeeping, no room service, et cetera, old bars of soap with hair in it, you name it.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.